Hi, I'm that drywall guy, Myron Ferguson. This presentation is on drywall repairs. It's interesting because every home, all the visible surfaces are covered with drywall, about 80% of the visible interior. So it just stands to reason that over time, every contractor or homeowner is going to be faced with doing some sort of drywall repairs. So let me just go through some of the simple things, and we'll end up with a large, actually resurfacing a portion of this wall. A little rule that I have is whenever the paper of the drywall is cut, it needs to have some sort of a tape over it. So in other words, if let's say we just make a cut on the wall, let's say it got gouged by a piece of furniture or something coming through. Now, I've cut right through the paper, so I can cover that with joint compound, but chances are that after I sand over that, that will still show as a little different. It'll actually still show kind of like as a cut in the wall. It might be even smooth to the touch, but it'll still be obvious. Another common problem is a screw that's popped. Basically there's one screw for every square foot of drywall in your house. So if you have 7,000 square feet of drywall, you have 7,000 screws in the house. So you're occasionally going to get a pop because of structural movement or expansion and contraction of the building materials. So typically if you have a screw pop, the traditional way is to put another screw into it, right next to it, like a little bit below it. And then reset the other one. And that creates a nice stable screw, and it's not going to pop again. But that's in the center of the wall. A lot of times these screws along the top plate, they pop, and then if you reset them, they tend to come back. I don't know why. I guess maybe there's a little more structural movement up along the top plate of a wall. So what I commonly do is I just take that screw out. Put it in my pocket. The drywall is not going to fall off, and now I don't have to worry about that screw popping again. And if you have an area that you have problems with the screws popping continuously, just take them out and patch over them. Believe me, it's going to be fine. It's funny because that's what my mother said. She's like, hey, you're supposed to be this drywall guy. Why do I keep having the screws popping? So that's when I first started taking them back out, so I wouldn't have that problem again and when I didn't want to have to hear about it. So those are two very small little patches. Let me just show you what I do with that. Now, the key with any patch, no matter how big it is or how small it starts out, you want to keep it, you want to blend it into the surrounding areas, but you don't want to create a bigger patch than is necessary. So the tape I'm going to use gets embedded in joint compound. Because what I'm using is this fiberglass matte tape. I like this for my patches because it's a very thin tape. And actually I can even cut that a little bit more to create an even smaller patch over the scratch that I put on there. The fiberglass matte tape pushes into the compound so it doesn't lay on top of the compound, so you end up with a relatively thin repair. Now what I do on the first coat is I just feather it out. I keep feathering it out until I can see the tape coming through. Now once this compound dries, I'm going to sand it lightly and put another tight coat over it. So even though that was just a little screw pop and just a little scratch, when I'm all done, I'm going to end up with like a 12-inch diameter repair over that little patch, but because I'm trying to blend it into the whole surface and make it invisible. If I just tried to treat that screw as just a small thing and just built the compound up on it and create a bump, that's going to be a lot more visible later. Another common repair that's necessary all the time is somebody put a hole in the wall, most likely a doorknob or something. And a lot of times, all I do is I'll just cut away any loose material. Like I got a little raised edge of the paper there, cut that out. Same thing here. And what I like to use for that type of a repair is a fiberglass mesh tape. This is a self-adhesive tape that comes in a roll, and you simply put it over the surface. And then I usually push it in slightly right where the hole is. You can buy fiberglass self-adhesive mesh that is already pre-cut. It just, instead of buying a whole roll, you just have something that you would simply stick over the top of the hole in the wall. Now, an interesting thing that I try to do when I'm hired to do repairs for somebody is I'm trying to minimize the trips I'm making here, because I have to wait for the joint compound to dry before I can apply my next coat. So if I could use a joint compound that sets up while I'm there like a plaster would, I can get more than one coat on, maybe all the coats on these repairs that I need today, and just have to make one additional strip to sand it out lightly. And what I use for that is I use the setting compounds. This is a 45, Easy Sand 45, which means I have a working time of about 45 minutes. They make like a 90, they make a 20, and they even make a 5-minute compound. A lot of times for a repair, I will get the 20-minute material, the 20-minute compound, because by the time I'm done with all the repairs, so I'll get all the repairs prepped with the tape on them, mix up some compound, and then apply it to them. And then typically by the time I'm done, I'm ready to apply the finish coat. So I'm just going to put a little, I didn't bring a pan with me, so I'm just going to put a little compound on this lid. Normally I would mix this up in a pan, and but you gotta make do sometimes. The setting compound sets up chemically, and the interesting thing about it is you can coat over it while it's still wet as long as it's set up, but you aren't supposed to apply any finishes like a paint or anything until it's thoroughly dry. It doesn't shrink much either as it dries. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm just going to press that over the hole I had here a few minutes ago, and pressing it right in through the mesh tape, so I'm actually filling the hole. Then I'm just going to take some and I'm just going to feather it out around the edges, just like I did around the other patches. This repair will have to be a little bit bigger than the other ones I did, because it's a much larger hole, and I've actually applied 2 layers of the mesh tape over, so it's become a little bit thicker. Another repair that is quite common is a stress crack. Like it's quite often over a doorway or something. But let's say this is your doorway opening. You might have a stress crack coming right down through the on an angle. what you might be tempted to do, and I could probably get away with it, is just put a little bit of mesh tape right over the top of that, and then coat it with joint compound and blend it in, and it disappears, right? But that's just a temporary fix, because the crack goes all the way through the drywall. So we want to repair the entire crack, not just the surface of it. So I take the utility knife and I just score it. This is what is commonly called creating a V groove. So now I'm not just patching the surface, I'm filling the crack and I'm patching all the way to the back. And what I like to do is take a little bit of the setting compound and pre-fill that. Then I'll cover it with my mesh tape. And because I'm using a setting compound, I'm able to put a little bit, I'm able to put a heavier coat on it right away compared to regular compound. Because don't forget, I've actually filled a 1/2 inch thick crack in there. So there's quite a bit of compound on here. But with the setting, you can really get away with that and end up with great results. Another common repair that I'm faced with quite often is, especially in a remodeling job, is there will be a place on the wall or along the floor where there was an electrical outlet box. You know, for some reason they don't want that there anymore. It's not uncommon at all. And it might be on an older job too where the walls are plaster. So I have a nice little technique for patching these holes that works with no matter how thick of material that is framed, the wall is coated with. Like if it's plaster, it might be 3/4 of an inch thick, or it could be 5/8 drywall or 1/2 inch. This will work no matter what thickness it is. So there's the hole that they've asked me to patch. What I like to do is I just get a scrap piece of drywall, and I cut it so it's oversized from the hole. That's a good height. Now I just want to get a width for this hole. Now I just take it and hold it next to the hole, and now I'm just drawing a line the width of the opening, and then the same for the height of the opening. Now I'm just going to go down here and cut it. I don't want to cut it while I'm holding it and cut myself. So I'm just taking a utility knife and following those lines right through. Now the centerpiece is about the size, or hopefully is the same size as that hole that is in the wall. Now what I do is I simply bend the drywall back and I peel it. I peel off the back, so now I have a piece of paper still attached. So that makes a nice solid patch. Simply put it over the hole to check it. And if it's good, so I'm just going to apply some compound. I'm applying the compound to the wall. And then I'm just going to apply a little bit to the edges of the patch because I did undersize the cut just a little bit. So just to help stabilize it, I'm doing that. You can see what I mean when I said earlier that this patch will work no matter how thick the drywall or the plaster is, because it's not being attached to anything. It's simply kind of floating in there, filling the hole, but yet creating a nice, stable, easy to hide patch. And I always start feathering it out right away, just a little bit. And this could have been done with a setting compound as well. So that's all I would do with that today. Now it would really need 2 more coats. One to feather it in better, and then another one that would be lightly sanded before, and then apply just another thin, tight coat. It's interesting because whenever you do a patch on a painted surface, really the compound, once it's sanded, is quite a smooth surface. And a painted surface, typically is painted with a roller, has like a little bit of an orange peel texture to it. So now we've created this real smooth area wherever we've done a patch, and even though we blended it in really well, it's still a little bit obvious because of the slightly different texture. So a little trick that I have is, like let's say this is the patch, and when I'm all done it would end up being about that big, right? When the homeowner comes home, they know you've done a patch. Even though now I've got it all painted, they know you've done a patch, and they don't just walk into the room and say, oh wow, it looks good. No. They typically know where that is, so they'll walk up there and they'll be like, I can still see that. And that's because of those little textures that I did. So a little trick to help hide that is to enlarge it even more. After I'm done with this patch, I typically would have it only maybe 14 or 16 inch diameter circle. I might skim coat this whole area with a little bit of joint compound to even out that texture. And what I mean by skim coating is, I apply compound to a much larger area, and then I remove it. So for this patch right here, I might coat this, 3 foot by 3 foot area, although the only thing I really did was hide this patch, but then I just enlarged it with a very thin coat of compound. Put it on, take it off. And that evens out the texture of that painted surface to blend it in better to the patch. Like on this wall here, this is only like a 6 foot long wall, 6 by 7 feet high. I might skim coat the whole wall just to help hide these patches. Because like I said, the customer is it might be your home. You just don't want to see what was a patch on the wall. So skim coating the entire surface might be the solution to hiding these patches that you've done a great job patching. You've done a great job with the repair, but because of different textures, it becomes obvious even though you've done that. Let's see, what might be a bigger hole? Another hole that the true story is, I saw my daughter the other day, and she's like, "Oh, Dad, you get a laugh out of this because in her son's room, her 10-year-old son's room, there was a poster near the floor. And you know what was behind the poster? That hole. He was trying to hide that hole by moving a poster down. But my daughter being my daughter, she's seen my presentations on drywall repairs before. Right away she knew there had to be a hole behind it. And sure enough there was. So him and I fixed it. I showed him how to fix that hole. And it's the same idea as a flat patch. I mean, a little bit different, but what I did was I took the drywall, and I put it on, and then I put a we don't need to enlarge this hole too much. The larger I make this, the more difficult it's going to be to hide. Like right here is a 2x4 stud, and right here is a 2x4 stud. Do I want to enlarge this hole so that I can actually attach it to this framing and make it even more difficult to hide patch? No, I don't. I want to keep it as small as possible. So the damaged area, I believe, is only probably like that big. So I'm just going to cut myself a scrap piece of drywall that size, and I don't have to use a tape measure or anything. I'm simply hold the scrap piece up to over the hole. So that's a good width. I'm just going to cut a little bit off of the height. Clean the edges up a little bit. Then I'm just going to hold the scrap piece right over the hole, and just so that when I go to put it back in place, I know which way it goes. I put a little X on it. Trace around the edges. Then take utility saw. And just do a quick check, just make sure it's pretty close, and it is. Now, like I said, I didn't want to go all the way to the framing, so what I've done is I've cut a couple of pieces of furring strip that I'm going to attach through the drywall and into the furring strip. So that becomes my surface that I'm going to attach the patch to. And because it's only attached to the drywall, it's automatically going to make it nice and flat. If I were to cut it back to the stud and I misalign things a little bit, I could be actually creating a more difficult to hide patch. I don't mind these patches close to the floor like this. They're real easy to hide compared to one up more higher that you can catches your eye when you're walking in the room. These are much easier to hide. Then I'm just going to take the utility knife and I'm going to cut back any of the frayed edges that I frayed up a little bit with the saw. Now I can pre-fill that before I put the tape on, but because I'm using the fiberglass mesh tape, I'm able to force compound right through it, so I don't have to pre-fill it. What I like to do is when I apply the tape over these edges, I butt the tape. I don't lap it. By butting it, not lapping it, I'm keeping it thinner. As soon as I lap it, I've created a double thickness, which creates a little bit more of a bump. This particular tape that I'm using here is a thicker version of the fiberglass mesh tape. Probably isn't really necessary to use in this scenario, but it's my favorite tape because it's I think it's one of the stronger mesh tapes out there, so it gives me a little extra strength. So as I mentioned, I'm going to force the compound through the mesh tape and into the crack before I even start doing any feathering in or smoothing out. And that's probably good enough for now. Sometimes you gotta know when to walk away from it. Let that dry, and it's gonna take 2 more coats to finish. A nice fill coat around it, and then sand it lightly, and then apply a thin finish coat, and you're all set. So the key here was I kept all the patches as small as possible, and I used some good strong tape and different types of compound. The setting compound, which I used here, it's already started to set up. So if I actually had another 10 minutes, it would be set up and I could easily apply the finished coat. But I'll just show you how easy, what difference it does make. So simply by switching to the setting compound over these repairs, I'm able to do a really nice job all in one trip to the customer's house. I was about to say that's kind of it for the repairs, but I do have one more that I thought is always kind of an interesting one. Let's say you have a hole in the ceiling. It might be a similar thing where there was a wire coming through for internet or something. So you might have a hole. I don't know why, but I see that occasionally. You do occasionally have a hole in the ceiling. Now, if I were to use any of these tapes, like let's say the mesh tape or the larger square mesh tape that patch out, for a larger hole like that, I'm not going to use that on a ceiling because as soon as I start filling it with joint compound, it tends to sag down. So now, instead of having a flat surface, I have, a much more difficult to hide surface repair. So what I like for those ceiling patches is this. It's a self-adhesive patch that is metal on the back. It's a very thin aluminum metal, and it's self-adhesive. It's very sticky. You simply center that over the hole, and this doesn't have to be used on the ceiling. It can be used on a wall as well, but it makes a great demonstration for a ceiling. So you just press it in nice and tight with your taping knife, and then I'm able to coat it with joint compound. And I don't have to worry about it sagging. So that's a really nice repair for a ceiling, any sort of a hole in the ceiling. I have used these over ceiling, the ceiling boxes that were removed, and they work very well. So now, let's say you have this idea that this weekend you're going to remove the wallpaper in the bathroom. It sounds simple. You're sick of it. It's time for new wallpaper or just to paint the room. So as soon as you start digging into that wallpaper, you've got to get it wet and score it and scrape it. You basically have ruined that wall. You'd be surprised. You wouldn't be surprised the amount of people that have called me. They're like, Myron, we have to resurface or re-drywall our bathroom because we tried to remove the wallpaper. There's a solution for that. And another example might be your house is an older plaster house and has lots of little cracks in it, but the surface is actually quite stable. A situation where I've restored a bunch of houses over the years. They were plaster houses, and they were just in kind of bad shape, but years ago when they plastered homes and they knew they were going to be wallpapered, and a lot of them were, they did not put as thick of a finish coat of plaster over those walls. So now when they remove the wallpaper, they end up with this plaster wall that's quite stable, but certainly not a paintable surface. And to hire somebody to come in there and replaster those walls would be expensive, and it also would be difficult to find somebody with the skills to do a replastering job. So what I like to use is a product. It's called a wall reinforcement product. This is exactly the same material as this fiberglass mat tape that I use on some of these smaller repairs, only it's a 3-foot roll. This allows me to resurface an entire wall, entire ceiling, an entire house, and only add maybe 1/8 of an inch thickness to the entire surface. So we don't have to retrim, we don't have to remove any trim. If you've ever tried to hang 1/4 inch drywall, you know that you don't want to do it again. It's very difficult to make a nice smooth surface with another layer of drywall. Plus, you've added enough thickness now that you're affecting all your trim and things like that. So, what I do is I apply the wall reinforcement over the entire surface, but what holds it in place is joint compound. We're holding the adhesive that holds the wall reinforcement in place is joint compound. And I like to use a heavyweight joint compound. This is the traditional joint compound that we'd all used for years. It's I think it weighs like 60 pounds. It doesn't say, but they weigh about 60 pounds. This is a heavyweight, strong compound. It's got a lot of glue in it, and it's the compound to use for embedding this product. The lightweight compounds will work, but not as well as the heavyweight compound. So like I said, the adhesive that holds it in place is joint compound. And we don't need to put it on really heavy, but we want it on relatively uniform. So a good way to apply the compound is with a roller. I have a half-inch nap roller, and I'm just simply going to roll it on the surface. You know it's a good thickness when it goes on as easily as it's going on, and I haven't dripped all over the floor. If it all drips all over the floor from here to the bucket to the wall, you've got it too thin. Just a little hint there. I only mix water with my compound. I don't mix anything else. If I'm trying to thin the compound down, it's only with water. I'm not going to do the entire wall. I'm just going to do a 3-foot by 4-foot piece here. Now that's a nice thickness, and it's got a good consistency to it. I've gone a couple different directions with a roller. That helps even the thickness of the compound out a little bit. Now it could be put on with a taping knife as well, but I just find that for these large surfaces, the roller is the most practical way to do it. I'm just going to cut off a piece. It cuts very easily, so just like hanging wallpaper, just like hanging the wallpaper that you removed, you can cut it long and trim it around your ceiling edges, trim it around all your wood trim and moldings as well. So press it into place, and then instead of using a wallpaper brush, you're using a taping knife. I'm using a 12-inch taping knife to embed it into the compound. It wants to lay flat, and it doesn't really absorb moisture, so you don't really get many wrinkles in it. The only time you're going to get a wrinkle in it is if you just put it on first. But it wants to go on, it wants to lay nice and flat. And you can see I'm embedding it, and it's actually pulling the compound right through it because it pushes right in. Now, if you can imagine that this was a wall that was all severely damaged or old plaster, really, within minutes, you have made that really bad shaped surface into something close to perfect. Typically what I do, I will apply maybe an 8-foot section of this, and I butt them just like I would with wallpaper. I just keep going down the wall or down the ceiling. And then I apply another coat of joint compound. I just roll it on back over the surface. You know, this is before it's dry, after I've done 6 or 8 feet of